In a small-town courthouse, the air buzzed with whispers and murmurs. People craned their necks to get a better look at the scene unfolding before them. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old papers, giving it that classic courtroom feel you see in movies. At the center of everyone's attention was a teenage girl, barely 16 years old, standing nervously in front of the judge. She had oversized glasses perched on her nose, her hair tied back into a messy ponytail, and she clutched a worn-out notebook like it was her lifeline. The case seemed straightforward enough. The girl, whose name was Emily Carter, was accused of vandalizing her school's walls with graffiti. According to the prosecution, witnesses had seen her near the scene, and security footage showed her walking away shortly after the incident. It looked like an open and shut case. But what caught everyone off guard and added a layer of intrigue was that Emily didn't have a lawyer. Instead, she insisted on defending herself. When Judge Richard Hawthorne called the session to order, he glanced down at Emily with a mix of skepticism and amusement. His expression made it clear he thought this was going to be a waste of his time. "Miss Carter," he said, leaning slightly forward with a smirk playing on his lips, "you're not exactly Perry Mason here." The crowd chuckled politely, but Emily didn't flinch. If anything, there was a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, a spark of confidence hidden beneath her nervous exterior. What no one knew, not even the sharp-eyed reporters scribbling notes in the corner, was that Emily wasn't just any ordinary teenager. Beneath her unassuming appearance lay a mind sharper than most seasoned attorneys. In fact, she had already passed the bar exam months earlier, becoming one of the youngest licensed lawyers in history. But she kept this secret tightly under wraps, choosing instead to play the role of an awkward, inexperienced teenager. To everyone around her, including the judge, she appeared to be hopelessly out of her depth. As the prosecutor began laying out the evidence against her, the mood in the courtroom shifted. Witnesses took the stand, recounting how they'd seen Emily arguing with teachers earlier that day. One witness claimed she'd overheard Emily saying she wanted to get back at the school administration. Another pointed to grainy security footage showing Emily walking away from the defaced wall, paint cans lying nearby. The prosecutor presented these pieces as if they formed an undeniable chain of proof, each link locking Emily further into guilt. Emily listened intently, jotting down notes in her battered notebook. Her calm demeanor only fueled Judge Hawthorne's growing impatience. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly expecting tears or stammering excuses from the young defendant. After all, how could someone so young possibly counter such damning evidence? Yet when it came time for Emily to speak, the entire tone of the trial changed. Instead of crumbling under pressure, Emily stood tall. Her voice, though soft at first, carried a quiet authority that silenced the room. She started by pointing out inconsistencies in the timeline provided by the prosecution. How could she have been seen leaving the scene at 9 p.m. if multiple students testified seeing her inside the library until 8:45? Then she moved on to question the reliability of the blurry security footage. Was it possible that someone else wearing similar clothes had been mistaken for her? With every point she raised, the prosecution's case began to unravel. By the time Emily finished questioning the final witness, a janitor who admitted overhearing another student bragging about framing, the crowd was completely captivated. Even Judge Hawthorne sat up straighter, his earlier mockery replaced by a look of cautious curiosity. But Emily wasn't done yet. As she wrapped up her defense, she dropped a bombshell revelation. The real culprit behind the vandalism was none other than the principal's son. Apparently, he had confessed to friends during a heated argument, which somehow slipped through the cracks during the investigation. This twist sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Reporters scrambled to write down every word while jurors exchanged stunned glances. For Judge Hawthorne, the moment marked a turning point. For the first time in years, he found himself questioning his own assumptions. Had he let his biases cloud his judgment? Was he too quick to dismiss Emily simply because of her age and appearance? These thoughts gnawed at him as the trial progressed, setting the stage for a dramatic reckoning. Meanwhile, Emily remained composed, her confidence unwavering. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a story that would challenge perceptions, redefine justice, and leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. The courtroom was tense, the kind of quiet that feels heavy with anticipation. Everyone's eyes were glued to Emily as she stood there, still clutching her worn notebook but now exuding a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The prosecutor had just finished presenting their case, smugly believing they had sealed Emily's fate. But something about the way she looked at the judge, calm, almost amused, made a few people in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. When it was finally Emily's turn to speak, Judge Hawthorne leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, clearly expecting nothing more than a desperate attempt to deny responsibility. He wasn't alone in thinking this. Even some members of the jury exchanged skeptical glances. After all, what could a 16-year-old girl possibly say to counter such seemingly solid evidence? Emily began softly, almost hesitantly, as though she were nervous. She thanked the judge for letting her present her side, and then dove straight into the heart of the matter. Her first move was simple but effective. She highlighted inconsistencies in the timeline provided by the prosecution. According to the school records, she said, pointing to a document she'd brought with her, I was inside the library until 8:45 p.m. Witnesses can confirm this. Yet the security footage shows someone leaving the scene at 9 p.m. How is that possible? The prosecutor tried to interrupt, arguing that the time discrepancy might be due to technical errors or miscommunication. But Emily didn't let them off the hook so easily. With a calm voice, she asked, if there's a possibility of error in timing, why are we relying solely on this footage to prove my guilt? Isn't it also possible that someone else wearing similar clothes could have been mistaken for me? Her question hung in the air, unsettling not just the prosecution but also the judge. For the first time, Judge Hawthorne uncrossed his arms and leaned forward slightly, his expression softening from mockery to curiosity. It was subtle, but those watching closely noticed the change, but Emily wasn't done yet. Next, she turned her attention to the witnesses who claimed to have seen her arguing with teachers earlier that day. One by one, she gently questioned their testimonies, revealing holes in their stories. A teacher who said she saw Emily storming out of the classroom admitted under Emily's careful questioning that she couldn't actually remember whether it was Emily or another student wearing a hoodie. Another witness, a janitor, confessed he only assumed it was Emily because someone else mentioned seeing her around the building earlier. Each revelation chipped away at the prosecution's case, leaving cracks that grew wider with every passing minute. By the time Emily moved on to the most explosive part of her defense, the entire courtroom was hanging on her every word. She pulled out a handwritten note, one she explained she'd received anonymously during lunch break, and read aloud its contents. The note contained fragments of a conversation between two students discussing how the principal's son had bragged about vandalizing the wall and framing someone else for it. According to the note, the son wanted to teach the school a lesson after being suspended unfairly. Emily explained that while the source of the note wished to remain anonymous, the details aligned perfectly with other inconsistencies in the case. The prosecutor objected immediately, calling the note hearsay and demanding it be stricken from the record. But Emily countered smoothly, saying, even if the court doesn't accept this as direct evidence, shouldn't we investigate further? If there's even a chance the real culprit is still walking free, isn't it our duty to find out? Her words struck a chord, not just with the jury but with everyone in the room. There were murmurs among the spectators, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding in agreement. Even Judge Hawthorne seemed conflicted, his earlier dismissive attitude replaced by a growing sense of unease. As Emily wrapped up her argument, she did something unexpected. She stepped away from the podium and walked closer to the jury box, looking each member directly in the eye. I'm not asking you to believe me blindly, she said, her voice steady and sincere. All I'm asking is that you look at the facts without assumptions. Ask yourselves, does the evidence truly point to me, or are we jumping to conclusions based on appearances? Her closing statement hit hard. The jury exchanged meaningful glances, and even the hardened prosecutor shifted, uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time since the trial began, doubt crept into the minds of everyone present, including Judge Hawthorne. The judge called for a recess shortly afterward, retreating to his chambers to process everything he'd heard. Meanwhile, outside, the courtroom, reporters swarmed like bees to honey, eager to capture reactions from anyone willing to talk. Speculation ran wild. Was Emily really guilty? Or was she cleverly manipulating the system? No one knew for sure, but one thing was certain. The trial had taken a dramatic turn no one saw coming. Back inside, Emily sat quietly at the defendant's table, her notebook closed and her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't look triumphant or relieved, just focused, as if she were waiting patiently for the next phase of the battle. And deep down, she knew the real fight was far from over. The recess dragged on longer than anyone expected. The courtroom, once buzzing with tension and whispers, had fallen eerily silent as people waited for Judge Hawthorne to return. Reporters huddled near the doors, scribbling notes or whispering into their phones, trying to piece together what might happen next. Spectators fidgeted in their seats, some leaning over to share hushed theories with their neighbors. At the center of it all, Emily sat calmly at the defendant's table, her hands resting lightly on her notebook. She didn't seem anxious or impatient, just quietly focused, like someone who knew exactly how this story would unfold. When Judge Hawthorne finally re-entered the room, his expression was unreadable. He took his seat with deliberate slowness, adjusting his robe and shuffling papers before addressing the court. For a moment, he simply looked down at Emily, his gaze softer than it had been earlier but still heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then, clearing his throat, he spoke. "Before we proceed," he began, his voice carrying a weight that silenced even the faintest rustle in the room, "I want to acknowledge something important." He paused, glancing briefly at the jury before turning back to Emily. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology for underestimating you and allowing bias to cloud my judgment." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the gallery, followed by murmurs of disbelief. People craned their necks to get a better look at Emily, who sat perfectly still, her face betraying no hint of surprise or satisfaction. It was as if she'd known this moment was coming all along. Judge Hawthorne continued, his tone unusually humble. "This trial has reminded me, and should remind us all, that appearances can deceive. Talent and intellect don't come in a specific package, nor do they belong to any particular age group. I regret my earlier behavior and hope Miss Carter will accept my apology." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes meeting the judge's without hesitation. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and composed. "Mistakes are human, and what matters most is learning from them." Her response drew more murmurs from the crowd, not because it was dramatic or fiery, but because it carried a quiet grace that felt genuine. With the apology out of the way, Judge Hawthorne called for the trial to resume. But just as the prosecutor stood up to deliver his closing argument, Emily made a move that shocked everyone. Rising from her seat, she reached up to remove her oversized glasses and let her hair fall loose around her shoulders. In one fluid motion, she transformed from the awkward teenager everyone thought they knew into a poised young woman radiating confidence and intelligence. Then came the real bombshell. From her bag, she pulled out a folded document and held it, up for everyone to see. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I am fully qualified to practice law. If you'd checked my credentials instead of mocking me, we could have avoided much of this circus." The room erupted. Cameras flashed wildly as reporters scrambled to capture the scene. Spectators leaned forward, straining to catch a glimpse of the paper Emily now handed to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Hawthorne unfolded it carefully, his brow furrowing as he read. The document was unmistakable, a valid law license, dated months prior. Emily wasn't just pretending to be smart, she was a licensed attorney. For a long moment, the judge stared at the license, his face pale. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of awe and shame. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice quieter now, "you've proven yourself beyond doubt, not only as a capable advocate, but as someone who understands the principles of justice better than many seasoned professionals." Emily smiled faintly, tucking the license back into her bag. "Justice isn't about titles or appearances," she replied. It's about fairness, truth, and giving everyone a fair chance to tell their side of the story. Her words resonated deeply, especially with the jury. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted entirely. Gone was the skepticism and mockery that had filled the room earlier. Instead, there was a palpable sense of respect and maybe even admiration for the young woman who had turned the tables on everyone. Outside the courthouse, chaos ensued. Reporters surrounded Emily as soon as she stepped out, shouting questions and thrusting microphones toward her face. "How did you manage to pass the bar exam at such a young age?" one asked. "Why did you choose to defend yourself instead of hiring a lawyer?" another pressed. Flashbulbs popped continuously, capturing every angle of the girl who had become an overnight sensation. Emily handled the attention with remarkable poise. Standing tall despite the swarm of cameras, she explained her reasoning in simple terms. "Sometimes people only see what they expect to see," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I wanted to prove that talent and intellect don't come in a specific package or age group. And yes, I chose to defend myself because this case was personal. It wasn't just about vandalism. It was about being judged unfairly based on assumptions." Her statement struck a chord with the crowd gathered outside. Some clapped while others nodded in agreement. Social media exploded with reactions, hashtags like Teen Genius and Justice for All trending within minutes. People debated whether the legal system needed reform to prevent similar injustices in the future. Others praised Emily for exposing flaws in how cases were handled, particularly when it came to young defendants. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, deliberations began. The jury, visibly shaken by the revelations, took their time weighing the evidence. Every inconsistency Emily had pointed out, the shaky timeline, the unreliable witnesses, the confession implicating the principal's son, was dissected thoroughly. Hours passed before they finally reached a verdict. When the foreperson stood up to announce the decision, the courtroom fell utterly silent. "We find the defendant not guilty," they declared. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, followed by applause from supporters in the gallery. Even the prosecutor looked relieved, perhaps realizing that justice had ultimately been served. As Judge Hawthorne dismissed the court, he lingered for a moment, watching Emily gather her things. Before she left, he called her over. "Miss Carter," he said, extending his hand, "you've taught me a valuable lesson today, one I won't soon forget." Emily shook his hand firmly, offering him a small smile. "We all make mistakes, Your Honor," she said. "What matters is what we learn from them." And with that, she walked out of the courtroom, leaving behind a legacy that would inspire countless others. The verdict echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap, sending waves of emotion rippling across the room. For Emily, it wasn't just a legal victory, it was validation. She had proven her innocence and exposed the truth about who was really responsible for the vandalism. But as she stood there, surrounded by reporters and well-wishers, she didn't bask in the spotlight or let the moment inflate her ego. Instead, she kept her head down, focusing on what mattered most, ensuring that justice wasn't just served for herself but for others too. Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. Reporters shouted questions from every direction, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. People gathered around, some cheering, others whispering among themselves about the shocking twist in the trial. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Talking Teen Genius and Justice Exposed, turning Emily into an overnight sensation. Memes flooded timelines, memes where oversized glasses and messy ponytails became symbols of hidden brilliance. It was overwhelming, but Emily took it all in stride. When asked why she chose to disguise herself during the trial, Emily's answer was simple yet profound. "People see what they expect to see," she said, her voice steady despite the noise around her. "If I'd walked in here looking confident and polished, everyone would have assumed I was lying or trying to pull something over on them. By playing the part of an awkward teenager, I forced people to confront their biases, and that opened the door for me to show them the truth." Her words struck a chord with many. Viewers at home nodded along, sharing posts about how Emily's story highlighted deeper issues within society. Conversations erupted online and offline about prejudice, stereotypes, and the importance of giving people a fair chance, regardless of age, appearance, or background. Schools started discussing her case in classrooms, using it as a real-life example of critical thinking and resilience. Emily hadn't just won a court case. She'd sparked a movement, but Emily didn't stop there. Once the initial frenzy died down, she made a bold decision. She turned down lucrative offers from top law firms eager to hire her. Her reasoning? "I didn't become a lawyer to chase money," she told reporters during a rare sit-down interview. "I did it because I believe in fairness, and right now the system needs help reaching the people who need it most." With that goal in mind, Emily founded a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free legal aid to marginalized communities. She called it Equal Ground, inspired by her favorite quote, "Never underestimate anyone." The organization focused on helping young people navigate the complexities of the legal system, offering workshops, mentorship programs, and even mock trials to teach kids about their rights. Emily wanted to empower others to stand up for themselves just as she had done. What set Equal Ground apart was its unconventional approach. Emily often went undercover during investigations, using disguises to blend in and gather information firsthand. Whether it was posing as a high school student to uncover bullying incidents or dressing casually to observe workplace discrimination, she used stereotypes to her advantage. Her methods were unorthodox but effective, earning her both praise and criticism. Some argued that her tactics pushed ethical boundaries, while others hailed her as a modern-day hero. Judge Hawthorne, meanwhile, found himself reflecting deeply on his role in the trial. He couldn't shake the memory of how he'd mocked Emily in open court, dismissing her as nothing more than a naive teenager. That moment haunted him, not because he feared public backlash, but because it reminded him of his own flaws. Determined to make amends, he reached out to Emily shortly after the trial ended. Their first meeting took place at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Judge Hawthorne arrived early, nervously tapping his fingers against the table as he waited. When Emily walked in, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, he almost didn't recognize her without the oversized glasses and frumpy clothes. She greeted him warmly, shaking his hand with a firm grip that belied her small frame. "I owe you an apology," Judge Hawthorne began, his voice tinged with regret. "I underestimated you, and I allowed my biases to cloud my judgment. That's not something I'm proud of." Emily listened patiently, her expression thoughtful. "We all make mistakes," she replied after a moment. "What matters is learning from them. You apologized in court, and that meant a lot, not just to me, but to everyone watching." The two talked for hours, covering everything from the trial to broader issues within the legal system. To Emily's surprise, Judge Hawthorne expressed a genuine interest in supporting her work with Equal Ground. He offered to mentor her, sharing decades of experience and insight that could prove invaluable as she navigated the challenges ahead. Their unlikely friendship blossomed into a partnership, symbolizing growth, redemption, and mutual respect. As news of their collaboration spread, it reignited discussions about reforming the justice system. Law schools invited Emily to speak at conferences, where she shared her experiences and advocated for changes to address implicit bias. Judges, lawyers, and policymakers listened intently, moved by her passion and authenticity. Even critics who once dismissed her as a novelty began to take her seriously. Back in her hometown, Emily's impact grew steadily. Equal Ground expanded rapidly, thanks in part to donations pouring in from supporters inspired by her story. The organization opened free legal clinics in underserved neighborhoods, staffed by volunteers eager to make a difference. Emily spent countless hours mentoring young people, teaching them how to advocate for themselves and others. She encouraged them to question assumptions, challenge injustices, and never settle for less than fairness. One day, while visiting one of the clinics, Emily met a boy named Alex. He was barely 13, shy and withdrawn, but his eyes lit up when he talked about wanting to become a lawyer someday. "I want to help people like you helped me," he told her, clutching a notebook, filled with scribbled notes about court procedures and laws. Seeing him reminded Emily of herself at that age, curious, determined, and hungry for knowledge. She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You can do it," she said, her voice full of conviction. "Don't let anyone tell you. Otherwise, remember, appearances don't define us. What matters is what's inside." Alex beamed, nodding enthusiastically. In that moment, Emily realized that her journey wasn't just about proving herself. It was about paving the way for others to rise above limitations and achieve greatness. Her story had become a beacon of hope, inspiring countless individuals to dream bigger and fight harder for justice. And though fame followed her wherever she went, Emily remained grounded. She continued to live simply, dedicating her time and energy to causes she believed in. Every success, every milestone, reminded her of the power of perseverance and the importance of staying true to oneself. As the sun set over the city skyline, casting golden hues across the streets below, Emily stood outside her clinic watching families walk by. She smiled softly, knowing that the work she'd started was far from over. But she also knew that change was happening, one person, one case, one community at a time. Years passed, and Emily's name became synonymous with brilliance, integrity, and innovation in the legal world. Her story wasn't just a courtroom drama anymore. It was a movement. People talked about her not because she had been a teenage prodigy, but because of what she did with that talent. She didn't use her success to climb corporate ladders or chase fame. Instead, she poured every ounce of her energy into making the justice system fairer for everyone, especially those who couldn't afford it. At first, critics dismissed her efforts as idealistic. They said someone so young couldn't possibly understand the complexities of real-world problems. But Emily proved them wrong time and again. Her nonprofit Equal Ground grew into a national force. Clinics popped up in cities across the country, offering free legal aid to low-income families, students, and marginalized communities. The organization trained volunteers, lawyers, paralegals, and even everyday citizens to help people navigate the often overwhelming maze of laws and paperwork. What started as a small idea in Emily's mind had become a lifeline for thousands. One of the things that made Equal Ground stand out was its focus on education. Emily believed that knowledge was power, and she worked tirelessly to teach others how to advocate for themselves. Workshops were held in schools, community centers, and even prisons. She taught kids how to write letters to lawmakers, showed parents how to fight unfair eviction notices, and guided teenagers through mock trials where they learned the basics of law. Her teaching style was simple yet effective. She broke down complicated concepts into relatable terms anyone could understand. "The law isn't just for lawyers," she'd say. "It belongs to all of us." But Emily didn't stop at workshops and clinics. She also launched a podcast called Voices of Justice, where she interviewed activists, judges, and ordinary people whose lives had been impacted by the legal system. Each episode highlighted different struggles: discrimination in housing, unequal treatment in schools, barriers faced by immigrants, and offered practical advice on how listeners could make a difference. The podcast quickly gained traction, reaching audiences far beyond what Emily had imagined. Listeners wrote in sharing their stories, thanking her for giving them hope and tools to fight back against injustices. Her methods continued to draw attention and, sometimes, controversy. Some traditionalists criticized her unorthodox approach, particularly her habit of going undercover during investigations. Once, she disguised herself as a factory worker to expose unsafe working conditions. Another time, she posed as a college student to uncover discriminatory practices in university admissions. While some praised her bravery, others accused her of overstepping ethical boundaries. But Emily stood firm, arguing that the ends justified the means. "If breaking stereotypes helps me uncover the truth," she told reporters, "then I'll keep doing it." Despite the occasional backlash, Emily's reputation only grew stronger. Judges cited her work in court opinions. Lawmakers referenced her ideas when drafting new policies. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about her genius, turning her into a cultural icon. Yet, through it all, Emily remained humble. She avoided the glitz and glamour of celebrity life, choosing instead to stay grounded in the work that mattered most to her. Judge Hawthorne, now retired, became one of her biggest supporters. Their friendship had deepened over the years, evolving from mentorship to genuine camaraderie. He often joined her at speaking engagements, sharing his own journey of learning and redemption. Together, they co-authored a book titled Blind Spots: Lessons in Justice and Humanity. In it, they explored themes of bias, fairness, and the importance of seeing beyond appearances. The book became a bestseller, sparking conversations in classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms across the nation. As Emily's influence expanded, so did the impact of her advocacy. Law schools began incorporating her case studies into their curriculums. Courts implemented reforms aimed at addressing implicit biases, inspired by the lessons learned from her trial. Politicians introduced legislation to protect young defendants and ensure equal treatment under the law. None of this happened overnight, but each step forward felt like a victory worth celebrating. Yet, despite her achievements, Emily never lost sight of why she started this journey in the first place. She remembered the fear and frustration she felt as a teenager standing alone in that courtroom, judged not for her actions, but for her age and appearance. That memory fueled her determination to create a world where no one else would have to face the same injustice. On the 5th anniversary of her trial, Emily returned to the courthouse where it all began. It looked almost the same polished wood floors, the same faint smell of old paper. But something felt different. This time, she wasn't there as a defendant. She was invited to speak at a ceremony honoring individuals who had made significant contributions to justice reform. Standing at the podium, Emily scanned the room. Familiar faces smiled back at her. Former jurors, reporters, even Judge Hawthorne, who gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "When I walked into this courtroom 5 years ago," she said, her voice steady and warm, "I didn't know what to expect. I was scared, nervous, and unsure if anyone would believe me. But I also knew one thing for certain. The truth mattered more than anything else." She paused, letting her words sink in. "That trial taught me something I'll carry with me forever. It taught me that justice isn't blind. It's human. It's shaped by our assumptions, our biases, and our willingness to see beyond what's right in front of us. And while we can't eliminate those blind spots completely, we can work to minimize them. We can choose to listen, to question, and to care." The audience erupted in applause, some wiping away tears. When the clapping finally subsided, Emily added one last thought. "None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. But if we commit ourselves to learning from those mistakes, if we commit ourselves to fairness and empathy, we can build a better future. Not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come." After the ceremony, Emily took a quiet moment to reflect. Walking through the empty halls of the courthouse, she ran her fingers along the worn railing, remembering the girl she used to be. She smiled softly, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. Pride for how far she'd come, and gratitude for the people who had supported her along the way. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emily stepped onto the courthouse steps, greeted by a crowd of supporters holding signs that read, "Thank you, Emily," and "Justice starts here." Kids ran up to her, asking for autographs or shyly handing her drawings they'd made of her in court. Parents thanked her for giving them hope. Volunteers shared stories of how her work had changed their lives. As she stood there, surrounded by love and admiration, Emily realized that her journey wasn't about personal glory. It was about creating ripples, small actions that grew into waves of change. Every child she inspired, every family she helped, every law she influenced was part of something bigger than herself. And though the road ahead still held challenges, she knew she wasn't walking it alone. With a final wave to the cheering crowd, Emily turned and walked toward her car. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to make a difference, and she was ready. Years later, Emily's story had become more than just a tale of courtroom brilliance or legal reform. It was a legacy a reminder that courage, determination, and empathy could change the world in ways no one expected. She wasn't just a lawyer or an advocate anymore. She was a symbol of hope for countless people who felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated. Her nonprofit, Equal Ground, continued to thrive, branching out into areas she never dreamed possible. Free legal clinics now dotted every major city, and mobile units traveled to rural communities where access to justice was scarce. Lawyers volunteered their time, inspired by Emily's vision of fairness. Students studying law looked up to her as a role model, not because she was perfect, but because she proved that imperfection didn't define you. Your actions did. One day, while visiting a clinic in a small town, Emily met a young girl named Lily. She couldn't have been older than 10, with wide eyes full of curiosity and a notebook clutched tightly in her hands. Lily approached Emily shyly, tugging at her sleeve. "Are you really the girl who tricked everyone in court?" she asked, her voice soft but eager. Emily knelt down so they were eye to eye. "I didn't trick anyone," she replied gently. "I just showed them that appearances can be deceiving. Sometimes people don't see your potential until you show it to them." Lily nodded thoughtfully, flipping open her notebook to reveal pages filled with doodles of gavels, scales of justice, and courtroom sketches. "I want to be like you when I grow up," she said, her cheeks flushing with excitement. "I want to help people too." Emily smiled, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "You already are helping people," she told Lily. "By caring about fairness and standing up for what's right, you're making a difference. Keep believing in yourself, even when others don't. That's how you'll change the world." The one encounter stayed with Emily long after she left the clinic. It reminded her of why she started this journey, to inspire others to dream bigger, fight harder, and refuse to let stereotypes hold them back. Every child like Lily, every teenager doubting their worth, every adult struggling to find their place in the world, they were the reason she kept going. As the years went by, Emily's influence reached farther than she ever imagined. Schools across the country began teaching her story in classrooms, using it to spark discussions about bias, resilience, and justice. Law students debated her trial as a case study, analyzing how she dismantled assumptions and exposed flaws in the system. Even late-night comedians joked about pulling an Emily whenever someone cleverly turned the tables on authority figures. But Emily herself remained humble. Fame didn't change her. If anything, it deepened her commitment to staying grounded. She lived simply, avoiding luxury cars or expensive homes. Instead, she invested her earnings back into Equal Ground, ensuring the organization could continue its work without relying solely on donations. Her philosophy was simple. True success wasn't measured by wealth or accolades, but by the lives you touched. Judge Hawthorne, now older and grayer, often joined Emily at events. Their friendship had grown into something profound over the years, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. During speeches, he'd proudly introduce her as the girl who taught me humility, and recount how her trial had changed his perspective forever. Together, they became ambassadors for justice reform, speaking at conferences, mentoring young lawyers, and pushing for systemic changes that prioritized fairness over prejudice. One evening, as they sat together on a park bench overlooking the city skyline, Judge Hawthorne turned to Emily with a reflective smile. "You know," he said, "when I first met you, I thought I was the wise one, but now I realize I've learned more from you than anyone else in my life." Emily chuckled softly, nudging him playfully. "Don't sell yourself short," she teased. "You've done plenty of good too. Remember, we're all works in progress." He nodded, gazing out at the horizon. "Still, I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you are. You remind people that justice isn't just about laws, it's about humanity." Those words stuck with Emily as she returned home that night. They echoed in her mind as she tucked away her notes from the day, poured herself a cup of tea, and settled onto the couch. Outside her window, the city buzzed with life. Cars honking, streetlights flickering, voices rising and falling in distant conversations. It was chaotic, messy, imperfect, just like the world she worked so hard to improve. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was beauty. There were moments of connection, acts of kindness, and quiet victories that added up to something meaningful. Emily knew the fight for justice would never truly end. New challenges would arise, new battles would need fighting. But she also knew that every step forward mattered, even the smallest ones. A few weeks later, Emily received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, the kind of note that seemed rare in an age dominated by texts and emails. The envelope bore no return address, but inside was a single sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. "Dear Emily," it began, "I don't know if you'll remember me, but I was one of the jurors during your trial. At first I thought you were guilty. I'll admit I judged you based on how young you looked. But then you spoke and everything changed. You made me question my assumptions not just about you but about the world. Because of you, I see things differently now. Thank you for showing me that truth is worth seeking, even when it's hard to find." The letter ended with a simple signature, "A grateful juror." Emily read it several times, tears welling in her eyes. She hadn't realized the impact her trial had on those 12 strangers sitting in judgment that day. To think that her words, her actions had stayed with them all these years. It humbled her deeply. She framed the letter and hung it on the wall of her office, next to photos of volunteers, kids from workshops, and thank you notes from families she'd helped. Each item told a story, a piece of the puzzle that made up her journey. Together, they formed a mosaic of resilience, compassion, and hope. Years later, when Emily finally decided to step back from the spotlight, she chose a quiet way to do it. No grand farewell speeches, no flashy retirement parties. She simply announced that she'd be focusing on mentoring the next generation of advocates, passing the torch to those ready to carry the fight forward. Her last public appearance was at the opening of a new legal clinic in her hometown, dedicated to empowering young people interested in law. Standing before a crowd of supporters, volunteers, and aspiring lawyers, Emily delivered a heartfelt speech. "When I started this journey," she said, her voice steady and warm, "I didn't know where it would lead. All I knew was that I wanted to make a difference. Today, I look around and see that difference everywhere, in the faces of the people you've helped, the lives you've changed, the future you're building." She paused, scanning the room. "This isn't goodbye," she continued. "It's just the beginning of a new chapter, for me and for all of you. Keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, keep fighting for justice, not because it's easy, but because it's right." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers ringing out as Emily stepped down from the podium. As she walked through the clinic, shaking hands and hugging volunteers, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was her legacy, not fame or fortune, but the ripple effect of her work, carried forward by those who believed in the same ideals she did. That evening, as Emily drove home under a starlit sky, she reflected on everything she'd experienced. From the nervous teenager in the courtroom to the woman standing before hundreds today, her journey had been unpredictable, challenging, and rewarding beyond measure. And though the road ahead would always hold uncertainties, she knew one thing for sure. The fight for justice was far from over. But as long as people refused to give up, refused to let bias win, the world would keep getting better. One person, one act of kindness, one moment of truth at a time.